Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our very regular series about the example projects that are provided with Oracle Policy Modeling. This week, we're going to be looking at the Healthy Eating project, which is one of my personal favorites for two reasons. One, if you're learning Oracle Intelligent Advisor, it has some excellent demonstrations of particular rule functions and scenarios that you're bound to come across. And secondly, if you're into extensions, it has 3 or 4 really obvious scenarios that you can use to extend the user experience. Just before we go in, a personal note to all those of you who reached out to me recently following my recent health issues. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. But as you can see, fingers crossed, I'm back and everything is now as it should be. So with that said, let's take a walk into healthy eating. Of course, remember that to get to these projects, all you have to do is click Example Project and select the project that you're interested in. I've just downloaded Healthy Eating, so I'm not going to do it again. But before we go in there, I want to just call out the key features that you can see here. Entities. So the big deal here is that this is a good opportunity if you're new to Intelligent Advisor to look into and understand the concept of entities and relationships. It also has some, shall we say, less common features, signature collect, and it also uses a lot of dynamic visibility to ensure that the right information is displayed at the right time. So if you're working or in the healthcare sector or even in the education sector, since you could say that this is in a sense medical education, or a similar thing, the Healthy Eating is a great project for you to look at because it follows a flow that most people can easily identify with. Let's take a look at the project, in fact. So past the welcome screen, we have a details page where you fill out your family name and provide any details of any current allergies. And then we get into the most important part for this project, which is collecting a list of children and information about the different food that they've purchased, the food that they've eaten. And underneath we have some static labels to show you what we think you should have. So you'll notice here that there is one default child that is created, but you can go ahead and add and remove children from this control. So those of you who are new to Intelligent Advisor, this is an entity collect because you're collecting instances of an entity. And in this particular instance, the buttons that are associated with the entity collect have been customized. And you can see that I can change the labels here. And you can also see that if I want to, I could remove the buttons if I didn't need them for a particular scenario, although I do in this case. Following the collection of data, we have the person who is conducting the interview signing to say that they are agreeing with the information, putting a date, and then the last page has a lot of information. So the information is controlled largely by, excuse me, largely by the fact that they are in PDF or downloads. These downloads are of different types. You can see there's an interview summary document, a decision letter, a booking form, and there's some information about how you can go away and create your own documents based on these examples. For those of you who are not that familiar with Intelligent Advisor, you'll find those in the Forms section over here. And you can see that I have 4 documents in the forms, 3 of which are associated with global, so there would be 1 document per interview of each of these. And the final one is associated with the child. So if you have 5 children, you could expect to have 5 documents to download. Back to the project itself. What can we pull out of this project and say is useful learning for anyone getting into Intelligent Advisor? Well, I'm going to go to the Data tab, and you can see that in the global area, we have a number of numeric attributes, which are the totals consumed by the children. So this is the idea that if you have 2 children, we want to sum up the total amount of vegetables that they eat. And then at the child level, we have lots of information about the child. So the child, how many sweets the child eats per day, the number of servings of sweets, the number of servings of fruit, and so on. So we have information at the child level, and then we have kind of roll-up information at the top level, the global level. So that's why this is such a great project for learning, because when we look at the global attributes, we'll start to see very important functions that you get used to when you're working with Intelligent Advisor, like instance sum. And it says instance sum the children. So you can probably tell what that's doing. It's grouping together the children and calculating the total sum of the number of servings of vegetables the child eats per day. So the idea is that we'll sum up for each of the children, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, where did we get the children from? It's because although it's been defined as the child, the relationship is called the children. So in this case, this is what we call a containment relationship, which basically means the grouping of all the children. So it's called the children. So anytime you look at one of these global attributes and you see instance sum the children, it's referring to all of the children, all of the instances of the child, if you will. And we've got one each of those for each of the different food types. And then we have some other attributes, such as the overall health assessment. And you can see that the overall health assessment uses another really important function called for all. And that's looking to see if all of the children meet a particular criteria. So if all the children have a star rating of greater or equal to 5, then we consider that the family's overall health assessment is excellent. So for all is when you need to find out if something is true for all members, so for all of the children. So if all of the children are at that level, then everything's great. If we go back down to the child and we start looking at the child's assessment, we'll see here, for example, we have tables to align each of the children's consumption with, shall we say, an individual child assessment. So if everybody's above 5, then the family is considered to be good, but we also want to assess what the child's particular assessment is. And then we have a whole bunch of Booleans, very typical Oracle Intelligent Advisor, because we want to say, well, if you have a certain threshold and you're below that threshold, then you need to eat more meat, or you need to eat more sweets. I'm not sure that works, but you need to eat more fruit or whatever. So these are great rules for understanding how these sort of things fit together. And I encourage you to go into debug mode. Let's start the interview. And let's add a child. And we'll add some vegetables. Okay, so I've added one child. I'll go next. So the assessor is Dr. Smith. The signature, there's the signature that we were talking about, and the date, and next. So now we have some documents available, as we described earlier. We have these downloadable forms, but let's swap over to the data tab just for a moment to see the data that came out of this. So in the children, we have Richard, and we can see that Richard has his input attributes. These are the things that I entered. I said that Richard eats 6 portions of sweets per day. And you can see that there are inferred attributes saying that I got a 0 for grains, I got a 0 for sweets, I got a 1 for fruit. So these are all based on this concept of depending on how many portions you eat, whether you're good, bad, or indifferent. And you can see that my assessment for sweets consumption is too high. And that's because, again, there's a threshold and I've been set to too high. Now we have the Booleans telling me that Richard's intake of sweets is not acceptable. And you can see these sort of things are using exactly the same leverage and saying, well, if you go over a certain number or go under a certain number, then you are consuming an excessive amount of sweets or an excessive amount of fruit or whatever. And we have some more recommendations, such as I should eat more grains because, once again, I am hitting a lower end of a threshold or whatever. Then if we swap over to the global tab, we can see, for example, the total grains consumed by the children is 2. I'm actually going to go back to the food consumed. I'm going to add a second child who's much better behaved than I am, as you can see. And we'll just go back through the interview and back into the data tab. So you can see that the total grains consumed by the children is 6. That's because Richard had 0 grains. Sorry, Richard had 2 servings of grains per day. Anna had 4 servings of grains per day. So the global number is 6. So you can see here that this is the instance sum that I was talking about. If we look, for example, at the family's overall health assessment is good, We can right click and show decision because the overall health assessment is good. Richard's overall star rating is 4, Anna's overall star rating is 3, and you can see the breakdown of where all that star rating came from. So you can see all of the thresholds and the scores. So this is a great way to learn how to use the view decision, the show decision option as well. So that's kind of wraps it up for the basic overview of the project. And you can probably imagine that this kind of format where you collect data and then you draw conclusions out from the data is really, really useful no matter what industry you're in. We go back to these documents that I was talking about, and we'll go to the interview summary document, and we'll download the summary document. It'll take a little while to generate because I'm in the debugger, and we'll open it up. And you can see we have a lovely document here showing me the snapshot of the data of the children. And you can see how well this has been transformed into, shall we call it, document format. And that's because we're leveraging the built-in form. We call it forms, although I wish it wasn't called forms because it's not a form. If we go into the interview summary document, provided you have installed Oracle Analytics Publisher Desktop, you should be able to open this document up and see how it's built. I'm not here to talk about Analytics Publisher Desktop, but you can see here that this is a document that is built like a template and uses various kind of markup language to describe when to show the tick and when to show the cross, how to show the number of stars, and so on. So that just about wraps it up for the basic overview. What can you do with this project if you're interested in extending a little bit further? Well, there are a couple of things we could do. The first thing you might want to do if you're starting out in extensions is to consider something simple like a Boolean. So this is just a checkbox, but it's been transformed into a slightly more attractive check. Well, you could argue it isn't that much more attractive, but and I have the debugger running here. Sorry, the console running here. So there's a bunch of output, and you can see that I have yes and no, and there's a standard visibility rule here that says when you click this button, when you give it this value, then you should provide details. So this is a extension, and if we pop into the extension, we take a look at the relevant page. So this is the control. It used to be a standard radio button, and it's using a custom property, and it's basically extending a radio button. Now, a lot of what would happen here probably could have been done in a styling extension, but just so we can talk about it for a second. So you can see that this is an input extension because a radio button is an input, and then we get the available options. So this would work also if it was a drop down, and we build a slightly more funky thing, and we tell you what happens when you click on it, and give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down depending on when you click on it, and so on and so on. If that kind of extension seems a bit tame, a bit too basic for you, well, you could go on a little bit further and you could say, and we've talked about this in a previous example, I think, or maybe in one of the articles about extensions in general, where you could say that when you start entering data, I'm just going to be talking about suites for this particular one. We add another child. Good job, I'm just checking suites. So you can see here that we have a dynamic chart underneath, which is mapping out the data in these suites. Let's put one. There you go, that's better. So this is a container extension. If we go over to the relevant page, oops, it's the one underneath, food consumed, there we go. We can see that we have a container and it has a custom property and it is a chart. I called it chart because it is a chart. And the interesting one behind this is that it's actually using D3 for dynamic data display. So this is a control extension of type container. and basically it pulls out the entity data and updates it, chooses a color, usual sort of thing. And this is pretty much standard D3 if you've ever come across that particular JavaScript library before. So that's another cool extension that you could add to this. And finally, the third and last one is one that we get asked out about quite a lot, is that the entity collect, we have decided to change the layout and the display of the entity collect to use a more standardized entity collect. This is actually using JQ Grid, a very well-known grid-based layout. And we've got buttons to add children, and we can add a child. Let's say there's Richard, and we'll give Richard 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. Yeah, I put 30, so I've got a little error. Let's put 2. Let's get the console out of the way. So you can see that we can delete children, we can scroll through if we have many children, we can make it display, hide if we wanted to. So it's a slightly different kind of entity collect. And once again, this particular thing is an extension, and it has a variety of properties this time, including the attribute names and the widths available for each of the columns, the entity name, and so forth. Fairly standard stuff, but if we go in here, take a look at the entity collect. This is the custom entity collect with all the code that handles things like displaying the initial div, adding data, messing with jQuery to make it look good, building the data set, deleting things, inserting things, displaying errors, all that sort of stuff. So it's quite a considerable chunk of code, and it also basically just ensures that the data is submitted properly when you leave the page. So those are 3 examples of full-scale extensions that you could use to really push this example into something more sophisticated. So let's summarize. What have you got? You've got entities, great. Entity functions, great. You've got forms, great. You've also got 3 or 4 different extension opportunities: radio buttons, charts, entity collects, and that's just for starters. And we also saw some cool entity functions like instance sum and for all, and we saw a signature collect as well, which we haven't seen for a while. That about wraps it up for our round trip around healthy eating. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments, or if you're learning Intelligent Advisor and you need some assistance understanding some of the things we talked about today, again, just drop a message in the comment. Or if you feel generous, as they say at the end of these videos, subscribe to the channel or click the like button because it doesn't do you any harm. All right, take care. Bye-bye.